The rhythmic beeping of machines had become Grace Morgan's lullaby over the past 2 years. At exactly 11 p.m., she would slip into ICU room 27 at Southridge Memorial, her footsteps silent against the polished floor. There, bathed in the pale glow of monitors, lay Alexander Kane, the billionaire tech mogul whose empire had crumbled the night his Bugatti collided with a semi-truck on the rain-slicked highway. "Good evening, Alex," Grace whispered, adjusting the fresh white orchids she brought every Monday. The nurses thought she was foolish for spending her own money on flowers for an unconscious patient, but Grace had long stopped caring about their opinions. Alexander Kane had once been Seattle's golden boy, the youngest CEO to take a company public before his 30th birthday. His face had graced magazine covers, his romantic escapades splashed across tabloids. But here, stripped of his three-piece suits and arrogant smirk, he looked almost peaceful. Vulnerable even, Grace had been assigned to his case when he first arrived, broken and bleeding, 2 years ago. What started as professional duty had evolved into something she couldn't name. She found herself staying after shifts, reading to him from business journals and poetry collections alike. She played classical music and spoke about her day, her dreams, her fears. "The doctors say your brain activity has been increasing," she murmured, gently wiping his forehead with a warm cloth. "I know you can hear me somewhere in there." She pulled out a small bottle of lavender oil, dabbing it on his temples. The scent had become their ritual, something that felt sacred in the sterile hospital environment. "I met your brother today," Grace continued, settling into the chair beside his bed. "James came by during visiting hours. He's been handling your company, you know. Kane Industries is thriving under his leadership. He said the board voted to make his position permanent if you don't wake up within the year." Grace paused, studying Alexander's still features. She had memorized every line of his face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. "I wonder if you'd care about that," she whispered. "Or if you've found peace away from all the corporate politics and backstabbing." The truth was, Grace had fallen in love with the man she knew only in silence. Not the ruthless businessman the world feared, but the person she glimpsed in quiet moments. The way his breathing would change when she read poetry, his fingers would twitch slightly when she played his favorite jazz records. "I have something to tell you," Grace said, her voice barely audible. She glanced toward the door, ensuring they were alone. "Something I've never said to anyone." She leaned closer, her lips near his ear. "I love you, Alexander Kane. I love the man you are in this room, away from the cameras and the money and the games. Love your stillness, your mystery, the way you listen without judgment." A tear rolled down her cheek as she pulled back. "I know it's crazy. I know you'll probably never wake up, and even if you do, you won't remember me. But I needed to say it once." She stood to leave as she did every night. When something made her freeze, had his fingers moved? She stared at his hand, willing it to happen again, but there was nothing. "Good night, Alex," she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead before slipping out into the empty hallway. What Grace didn't know was that, behind his closed eyelids, Alexander Kane had been awake for 3 weeks, listening to every word, feeling every touch, and planning his next move with the calculating precision that had made him a billionaire. Alexander's consciousness had returned, like a slow tide, creeping back in fragments. First, the awareness of sound beeping machines, hushed voices, the soft rustle of fabric. Then touch, gentle hands adjusting his blankets, cool cloths on his forehead, the tender brush of fingers through his hair. Finally scent, lavender oil, and something uniquely feminine, warm and comforting. But it was Grace's voice that had anchored him to the world of the living. For weeks, he had listened to her confessions, her daily reports, her whispered declarations of love. Each word had carved itself into his memory, painting a picture of a woman unlike any he had known. In his former life, he had been surrounded by social climbers, gold diggers, and business associates who wanted something from him. Grace wanted nothing except his return to the world. The morning Grace found him awakening was carefully orchestrated. Alexander had been planning it for days, waiting for the perfect moment when they would be alone. As she leaned over him, Whispering her usual greeting, he slowly opened his eyes. "Grace," he whispered, his voice deliberately hoarse. Her gasp was worth every moment of his patient waiting. Tears streamed down her face as she called for the medical team, her hands trembling. As they held his, "You're awake," she sobbed. "Oh God, you're really awake." Alexander squeezed her hand weakly, maintaining his facade of a man just emerging from a long sleep. You stayed with me?" "Of course I did," Grace said, brushing tears from her eyes. "I told you I would be here when you came back." The next few hours were a whirlwind of medical tests and examinations. Dr. Martinez was astounded by Alexander's recovery, calling it nothing short of miraculous. James arrived within an hour, his face a mixture of relief and something darker that Alexander didn't miss. "Brother James said," gripping Alexander's hand, "Thank God you're okay. We thought we'd lost you." "How long?" Alexander asked, though he already knew the answer. 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days, James replied. "But don't worry about anything. I've been taking care of the company. Everything's under control." Sander nodded weakly, but his mind was already calculating. 2 years was enough time for James to establish himself, to convince the board that Alexander's return might destabilize everything they had built in his absence. "I need to speak with Grace," Alexander said, when the doctors finished their examinations. Privately, James frowned. "Alex, you need rest. The nurse can check on you later." "No," Alexander's voice carried a hint of his old authority.
"Hey, Grace."
Now, when they were alone, Grace approached his bed hesitantly. "How are you feeling? Do you need anything?" Alexander studied her face, this woman who had devoted 2 years of her life to a man who couldn't respond. She was beautiful in a quiet way, with warm brown eyes and auburn hair that caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. But it was her gentleness, her genuine care, that captivated him. "I remember," he said softly. Grace tilted her head. "Remember what?" "Everything. Your voice, your stories, the poetry you read, the lavender oil." He reached for her hand. "The way you said you loved me." Grace's face flushed crimson. I didn't think you could hear every word," Alexander confirmed. "You saved my life, Grace. Not the machines, not the doctors. You." "Alexander, I should explain. There's nothing to explain," he interrupted. "Shh. You gave me your heart freely, expecting nothing in return? Do you know how rare that is?" Before Grace could respond, James burst through the door with Dr. Martinez and a team of specialists. "Sorry to interrupt," James said, though his tone suggested otherwise, "but we need to run more tests. The media has gotten wind of Alexander's recovery. We need to prepare a statement." Alexander's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "So it begins," he thought. "The power games, the manipulation, the attempts to control him. But this time, he had an advantage." "Grace. Grace," Alexander said, his eyes never leaving James's face. "Would you do me a favor?" "Of course," she replied. "Don't leave the hospital today. I have something important to ask you later." As Grace nodded and left the room, Alexander began planning his counterattack. James might have spent 2 years positioning himself to take over Kane Industries permanently, but he had underestimated one crucial factor. Alexander Kane never lost a war, especially when he had something worth fighting for, and now he had Grace. 3 days after his awakening, Alexander was medically cleared to leave the hospital. Though he had convinced the doctors to keep him for observation one more night, he needed time to execute his plan, and Grace's shift didn't end until 11 p.m. During the day, he had been bombarded with visitors. Board members expressing relief at his recovery, while clearly calculating how his return would affect their positions. Business partners offering congratulations tinged with nervous uncertainty. And James, hovering like a protective brother, while subtly reinforcing his own indispensability. "The company's in a delicate position right now," James had explained. During one of their private conversations, the Yamamoto deal is still pending, and the board is concerned about stability. "Maybe you should take some time to recover fully before jumping back into corporate matters." Alexander had nodded agreeably, playing the part of a weakened man grateful for his brother's guidance. But behind his submissive facade, his mind was working at full capacity. He had spent the afternoon making discreet phone calls, calling in favors, and setting pieces in motion for a corporate chess game that would determine the future of Kane Industries. But first, he needed to secure his most important piece, Grace. As evening approached, Alexander dismissed his security detail and asked not to be disturbed. When Grace appeared for her final check of the night, he was waiting by the window, no longer confined. To his bed? "You're up," she said, surprised. "Should you be walking around so soon?" "I'm stronger than I look," Alexander replied, turning to face her. "Grace, we need to talk." She approached cautiously, and he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The dynamic between them had shifted since his awakening. The intimate conversations, the whispered confessions, the one-sided love affair they had shared when he was unconscious, had been replaced by the awkwardness of reality. "I've been thinking about what you said to me all those nights," Alexander began. "About love, about staying, about being there when no one else would." Grace's cheeks flushed. "Alexander, you don't have to marry me." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Grace stared at him, speechless. "I'm serious," Alexander continued, stepping closer. "Marry me, Grace." "You can't be serious," Grace whispered. "You just woke up 3 days ago? You don't even know me." "I know you better than anyone I've ever met," Alexander said, his voice intense. "I know you work double shifts to pay for your mother's cancer treatments. I know you cry during sad movies and laugh at terrible jokes. I know you have a scar on your left hand from when you were 7 and tried to save a wounded bird. I know you dream of opening a small clinic in a rural town somewhere." Yeah, Grace's eyes widened. "How could you possibly know all that?" "Because you told me. Every night for 2 years you shared your life with me, your fears, your dreams, your past. I fell in love with your voice before I ever saw your face." "This is insane," Grace said, backing away. "You're a billionaire. I'm just a nurse. We live in completely different worlds." "Money is just numbers in a bank account," Alexander replied. "What matters is that you saw something worth saving in me when no one else did. You loved me when I was nothing but a body in a hospital bed." "But I loved someone who couldn't hurt me," Grace said, tears starting to form. "Someone who couldn't leave or betray or disappoint me. The real you, the Alexander Kane everyone knows. He's ruthless and cold and completely devoted to the woman who brought him back from the dead." Alexander reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple but elegant diamond ring, nothing like the ostentatious jewelry he had given to previous women. "I had this made yesterday," he said. "Not because I want to buy your love, but because I want to promise you mine." Grace stared at the ring, then at his face. "Why? Why me? You could have anyone. 'Cause in a world full of people who want something. From Alexander Kane, the billionaire, you're the only one who loved Alexander Kane, the man. The broken, vulnerable man who had nothing to offer but the sound of his heartbeat." He dropped to one knee beside her chair, the ring box open in his palm. "Grace Morgan, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. Will you marry me?" Grace looked down at him, this powerful man kneeling before her in a hospital gown, offering her everything she had never dared to dream of. But there was something in his eyes, an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. "I need time to think," she whispered. "I understand," Alexander said, standing and closing the ring box. "But Grace, I need you to know something. Tomorrow I'm going back into a world where everyone wants something from me. My brother wants my company, the board wants stability, the media wants a story. You're the only person who wants nothing. But me." He placed the ring box on her palm. "Keep this tonight. And tomorrow, when you see who I really am in the outside world, remember the man you fell in love with in this room." As Grace left that night, ring box clutched in her trembling hand, she had no idea that Alexander's proposal was about more than love. It was about power, protection. It's a strategic alliance that would change both their lives forever. In his penthouse across the city, James Kane was making his own plans. Having learned about his brother's miraculous recovery and his suspicious attachment to a certain nurse, the Kane family had never been known for sharing power willingly. And James had worked too hard to let a comatose brother and a naive nurse destroy everything he had built. The next morning, Grace arrived at the hospital to find Alexander's room empty and spotless, as if he had never been there at all. A different patient was already being wheeled in. The only proof of their conversation was the velvet ring box, hidden in her purse. "Where is Mr. Kane?" she asked the charge nurse. "Discharged early this morning," came the curt reply. "Private medical transport." Very hush-hush. Grace felt a hollowness in her chest. After 2 years of constant presence, Alexander's sudden absence left her feeling unmoored. She went through her shift mechanically, her mind replaying their conversation. From the night before, had she dreamed the proposal? The ring box in her purse suggested otherwise. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander was walking into the Kane Industries boardroom for the first time in over 2 years. The glass conference table reflected the faces of 12 board members, their expressions ranging from surprise to concern to barely concealed hostility. "Ladies and gentlemen," James announced, standing at the head of the table, "I'm pleased to welcome my brother Alexander back to the land of the living." Polite applause filled the room, but Alexander could read the subtext in every face. His return complicated things. James had done well in his absence, perhaps too well. "Thank you all for your support during my recovery," Alexander said, taking his seat. "I'm eager to resume my responsibilities." "Actually, Alex," James interjected smoothly, "we should discuss that. The board has some concerns about the transition of power." Alexander leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at his lips. This was the James he remembered: ambitious, calculating, always one step ahead of everyone except his older brother. "What kind of concerns?" Alexander asked mildly. Board member Patricia Winters cleared her throat. "Mr. Kane, while we're all thrilled about your recovery, you've been unconscious for over 2 years. The business landscape has changed dramatically. Perhaps a gradual reintegration would be more appropriate." "Gradual reintegration?" Alexander repeated. "Into my own company. It's not about ownership," James said. "It's about stability. The Yamamoto merger alone is worth $12 billion. One wrong move could tank our stock price and cost thousands of jobs." Alexander nodded thoughtfully, then reached for his phone. "Patricia, you mentioned the Yamamoto merger. Interesting timing, considering Yamamoto Industries filed for bankruptcy protection in Tokyo this morning." The room fell silent. James's face went pale. "That's impossible," James stammered. "We just spoke with their representatives yesterday, did you?" Alexander asked, scrolling through his phone. "Because according to my sources, Yamamoto has been insolvent for 6 months. They've been stringing along multiple merger partners to buy time. I assume you didn't perform due diligence on their actual financial status." The board members began murmuring among themselves. Patricia Winters looked at James with barely concealed horror. "How did you," James began, "know about this?" "From a hospital bed," Alexander finished. "Simple. I never stopped being connected to my business. The question is, how did my supposedly competent interim CEO not know that our biggest potential merger was with a company hemorrhaging money?" Alexander stood, straightening his tie. "Now, unless there are any other concerns about my competency, I believe I have a company to run." The board meeting dissolved into chaos as members scrambled to distance themselves from the failed merger and reposition themselves with the returning CEO. James remained seated, stunned by how quickly his carefully constructed power base had crumbled. That evening, Alexander appeared at Grace's apartment building, leaning against a black Tesla in an impeccably tailored suit. Grace barely recognized him as the vulnerable man from the hospital room. "You look different," she said, approaching cautiously. "This is who I am outside that hospital room," Alexander replied. "What did you think about my proposal?" "I watched the news today," Grace said. "They're calling your boardroom performance ruthless. They said you destroyed your brother's reputation in 20 minutes. James overplayed his hand," Alexander said simply. "He forgot that I built this company from nothing. Did you really think I'd let him steal it while I was unconscious?" "Is that what this is about?" Grace asked, holding up the ring box. "Am I just another business move? Another way to show your power?" Alexander stepped closer, and for a moment, his corporate mask slipped. "Grace, everything I told you last night was true, but I won't lie to you about who I am. I'm not a gentleman. I don't forgive betrayal, and I don't lose gracefully. Then why do you want to marry someone like me? I'm not built for your world of corporate warfare and power games, because you're the only person who sees me as more than my net worth, Alexander said. And because I need someone I can trust completely, in my world, that's rarer than diamonds. Grace looked at him, this man who could destroy empires with a phone call, but had knelt before her in a hospital gown. What if I say yes? What happens to us when the novelty wears off? When you remember that you're Alexander Kane and I'm just Grace Morgan from small-town Oregon? And you don't know me as well as I thought, Alexander replied. I don't do anything. Halfway, Grace, if you marry me, you're not just getting a husband. You're getting a partner, a protector, and someone who will move heaven and earth to keep you safe. Safe from what? Alexander's expression darkened. From people like James, who see you as my weakness. From reporters who will dig into every aspect of your life. From social climbers who will befriend you only to get closer to me. From a world that will try to change you into someone you're not. Grace felt a chill. You're scaring me. Good, Alexander said. You should be scared, but not of me. Never of me. He reached out and touched her cheek gently. I'm offering you everything I have, Grace. My name, my protection, my fortune, and my heart. But I need to know that you're strong enough to stand beside me when the world tries to tear us apart. Grace looked down at the ring box in her hands, then back at Alexander's face. In the dim streetlight, she could see both versions of him. The ruthless billionaire and the broken man she had fallen in love with. Ask me again, she whispered. Alexander took the ring box from her hands, opened it, and once again dropped to one knee on the sidewalk outside her modest apartment building. Grace Morgan, will you marry me? This time, her answer was immediate. Yes. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger. Neither of them noticed the photographer hiding across the street, capturing every moment for the front page of tomorrow's newspaper. James Kane had played his final card, and the real game was about to begin. The headline screamed across every newspaper and website, and Seattle billionaire's bedside bride coma patient wakes up and proposes to nurse. The photographs were grainy but unmistakable. Alexander on one knee, Grace with tears streaming down. Her face, the diamond ring catching the streetlight. Grace's phone had been ringing non-stop since 5 a.m. Reporters. Distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, and curious coworkers all wanted their piece of the story. She had turned it off and was hiding in her apartment when Alexander arrived with coffee and croissants from her favorite bakery. I'm sorry, he said, as she opened the door. I should have anticipated this. Grace looked exhausted, her hair disheveled, and her eyes red from crying. My mother called this morning. She saw the news in Portland. I had to explain to her that I'd been secretly caring for a coma patient for 2 years and fell in love with him. What did she say? She asked if you were the reason I never came home for holidays anymore. Grace managed a weak smile. Out mothers know everything. Alexander set the breakfast on her small dining table and pulled her into his arms. We can handle this together. I've already had my legal team issue statements about our privacy. Media circus will die down in a few days, will it? Grace asked. Alexander, I don't think I understood what I was agreeing to. I woke up this morning to find my picture on the front page of newspapers. People are calling me a gold digger, an opportunist who took advantage of an unconscious man. They don't matter, Alexander said firmly. The only opinions that matter are yours and mine. Grace pulled away and walked to the window, looking down. At the street where photographers were still stationed outside her building? What if they're right? If I did take advantage? You were vulnerable, unconscious, and I fell in love with my idea of who you were. Grace, look at me. She turned, and Alexander was holding a manila folder. This is a copy of the security footage from the hospital from every night you visited me over the past 2 years. I had my team pull it yesterday. Grace frowned. Why? Because I wanted to see what I looked like through your eyes. Alexander opened the folder, revealing dozens of still photographs. Look at this one from 6 months ago. The photo showed Grace reading aloud from a book, her face animated and expressive as she gestured with her free hand. On the hospital bed, Alexander lay perfectly still, but somehow he looked peaceful rather than lifeless. "This one is from last Christmas," Alexander continued, flipping to another photo. It showed Grace decorating his room with small holiday ornaments, talking to him as if he could respond. "And this is from your birthday 8 months ago?" The final photo made Grace's breath catch. It showed her crying softly as she held Alexander's hand, whispering something the camera couldn't capture. "You told me you loved me that night," Alexander said quietly. "You said it was the saddest birthday you'd ever had because you couldn't share it with the person who mattered most to you." Grace wiped tears from her eyes. "You remember all of it, don't you? Every word, every touch, every moment. You chose to stay with me instead of going home to your own life." Alexander closed the folder. "Grace, you didn't fall in love with your idea of me. You fell in love with the truest version of me, the man I am when all the armor comes off." Before Grace could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Alexander's expression darkened as he looked toward the sound. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked. Grace shook her head. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Grace opened the door. "It's James Kane. We need to talk." Alexander moved protectively in front of Grace. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "Alexander." "Please," James's voice came through the door. "I'm alone. I just want to talk." Against Alexander's wishes, Grace opened the door. James stood in the hallway, looking haggard and desperate. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his expensive suit was wrinkled. "5 minutes," Alexander said coldly. James stepped inside, his eyes darting between Alexander and Grace. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "Going to the press, trying to use your relationship against you, it was wrong." "Yes," it was Alexander replied. "Now you're facing a hostile takeover bid from 3 different investment firms who smell weakness in Kane, industry's leadership structure. Congratulations, James. Your little power play is going to cost us both billions." "I can fix this," James said desperately. "I can make the board understand that we need to work together." "The board has already voted," Alexander said, unanimous. "Confidence in my leadership? Your resignation was accepted this morning." Grace watched the exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just about business. It was about family, betrayal, and the price of power. "James," she said softly, "why did you really come here?" James looked at her with something like surprise, as if he had forgotten she was more than just a pawn in his game with Alexander. "Because I've lost everything," he said quietly. "My position, my reputation, the respect of everyone who matters. And I realized that my brother, who was in a coma for 2 years, woke up and found something I've been searching for my whole life, which is," Grace asked, "someone who loves him for who he is, not what he can give them." Alexander's expression softened slightly. "James, I'm not asking for forgiveness," James interrupted. "I'm asking for a chance to start over, somewhere else, doing something that matters. But I needed to tell you both that what you have is real, and I'm sorry I tried to destroy it." After James left, Grace and Alexander sat together on her small couch, processing everything that had happened. "So what now?" Grace asked. "Do we have a small wedding and hide from the world? Do we elope to Vegas? Do we have a massive society wedding that gets covered by every magazine?" Alexander smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen since he left the hospital. "We do whatever makes you happy. If you want to get married in your hometown church with just your family, we'll do that. If you want to get married on a beach in Fiji with just us and an officiant, we'll do that too. And if I want to wait, take some time to figure out how to be Grace Kane instead of Grace Morgan, then we wait," Alexander said without hesitation. "Grace, I've waited 2 years in a coma and 3 days since I woke up to hear you say yes to marrying me. I can wait as long as you need to be ready for the life that comes after." Grace looked down at the engagement ring on her finger, then at the man who had somehow fallen in love with her voice before he ever saw her face. "I don't want to wait," she said quietly. "I've been loving you in silence for too long. I want to love you out loud in front of the world for the rest of our lives. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Grace leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Besides, if I can handle 2 years of one-sided conversations, I think I can handle a few photographers. Alexander laughed, pulling her closer. Mrs. Kane, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Mr. Kane, Grace replied, smiling against his lips. I'm counting on it. 6 months later, Grace Morgan became Grace Kane in a small ceremony. At the botanical gardens, where they had first walked together after Alexander left the hospital, the guest list was limited to family and close friends, but the love between them was boundless. As they exchanged vows, Alexander whispered the words that had brought him back from the darkness. I love you. And this time, Grace whispered back, I love you too. In the quiet moments after their wedding, when the photographers had gone home and the guests had departed, Alexander and Grace sat together in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Do you ever regret it? Grace asked. Choosing someone so ordinary when you could have had anyone? Alexander turned to look at his wife, this woman who had saved his life with nothing but love and patience and faith in the impossible. Grace Kane, he said, you are many things, but ordinary is not one of them. You are the woman who spoke to a silent man for 2 years and never stopped believing he would answer. You are the woman who loved me when I had nothing to offer but the hope of tomorrow. You are extraordinary, and you are mine. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Grace curled against Alexander's side, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She thought about all the nights she had whispered I love you into the silence, never knowing if he could hear her, never expecting an answer. Now as Alexander pressed a kiss to the top of her head and whispered, I love you too. Into the evening air, Grace knew that some loves are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth waking up for. The end.